The power had gone out sometime after 2 a.m., but I hadn't noticed right away. The fire in the lobby hearth was still glowing, and the storm outside made everything feel dim anyway. What I did notice, what made me set my coffee down mid-sip, was the front bell ringing. Once, then again. The lights were dead, no phones, no guests expected, and the storm was still throwing snow sideways across the long driveway. No vehicle lights, no footsteps in the fresh powder leading up to the door. Just that brass bell still swaying gently when I came around the desk. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever worked a night shift where something just felt off. And if these stories help pass the time, consider following so you don't miss the next one. My name's Dana Ellis. This happened almost 20 years ago now, but I remember it better than last week's grocery list. I was 37, then working night reception at a lodge in the San Juan Mountains, southwestern Colorado, not far from Ouray. I'd been divorced about a year, and the solitude up there suited me. At least back then it did. The lodge sat about 6 miles up a winding road from the nearest town, mostly catering to off-season hikers and the occasional writer looking for silence. We were open year-round, but saw the fewest visitors in the dead of winter, which was fine by me. It meant quiet nights and hours of reading by the fireplace. Len Turner, our overnight maintenance guy, would do his rounds around midnight, then usually crash in the staff bunk room unless something broke. That night, early February, a storm had moved in hard, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only one left in the world. Snow had started just after dinner, and by midnight it was a full whiteout. The radio said gusts were topping 50 miles an hour in some areas. No one with sense would have tried driving that road in those conditions. Around 1:40 a.m., I remember standing at the big lobby window watching the wind chase flakes sideways across the glass, half hypnotized, when the backup generator hiccuped and the lights flickered. Not a full outage, just that warning kind of flicker that makes you take stock of where the flashlights are. I grabbed one from behind the desk, checked the batteries, and set it beside my coffee. The fire in the stone hearth was burning low, but there was enough of a glow to keep the lobby from feeling too empty. I just sat down again when the front bell rang. Not the phone, the bell on the counter. Someone had pressed it once. Then, after about 10 seconds again. We didn't have automatic doors, just a big oak double door with iron hinges and a latch you had to wrestle in the cold. I hadn't heard it open, and when I turned toward the entrance, the vestibule was empty. But the bell was still gently rocking on its little spring, like someone had taken their hand away seconds before. At first, I thought maybe Len had come back down to mess with me. He was known to pull a few harmless pranks on quiet nights. But when I called out, nobody answered. Just the wind outside, faint through the thick old windows. I left the desk and stepped into the vestibule. The outer doors were fully shut, snow piled against the frame from the drift. No footprints. Not even boot scrapes. I stood there longer than I probably should have, just listening. And that's when the motion light in the entry breezeway flicked on. Now motion lights don't mean much out there. We got elk foxes, even a moose once, that set it off. But this time when I looked out, I saw a man standing at the edge of the breezeway, not walking up, just standing. Still as a statue, right where the light spilled onto the snow. He wasn't dressed for the storm, no parka, no scarf, just dark slacks and what looked like a blazer. Maybe navy or black, hard to tell in the light. He wasn't shivering either. Hands at his sides, face shadowed. He stood there for maybe 5 seconds, then started walking toward the door in a straight, deliberate line. I stepped back inside and let the door swing shut behind me. Something about him felt, I don't know, off, like he didn't belong in the frame. When I returned to the desk, he was already pushing open the main doors. Snow whipped in behind him, and I caught the scent of wet wool and something faintly metallic. He didn't say a word, just stepped inside, stopped at the desk, and placed a leather wallet on the counter. It wasn't open, just laid there like a quiet offering. He didn't reach for a pen or ask for a room. He didn't take off his coat. I asked if he had a reservation. Nothing. Then I asked, "You got caught in the storm?" Still no answer, but he blinked once, slowly. I remember that because it was the only movement he made besides walking in. Len must have heard the door that time because I heard his boots on the stairs a moment later. He came into the lobby, yawning, rubbing the sleep out of his face. When he saw the man standing at the desk, he froze just a little, barely noticeable if you weren't looking. Then he nodded and came to lean against the counter beside me. "Rough weather to be out in," Len said. Still no reply. I opened the wallet and found a single $100 bill and an old photograph, black and white, folded at the corners. It showed a boy standing in front of what looked like a train station. No ID, no credit card, no driver's license. Just that bill and the photo. I asked his name. He raised a hand and pointed to the registry. I slid it toward him and he wrote something in a slow, careful hand. All capital letters. Willard. No last name, no hometown. Just the one word. I assigned him room 2B. Ground floor near the back. Figured it was easier to keep an eye on if anything felt off. Len offered to show him the way, but the man shook his head and walked down the hallway alone, never looking back. When we heard his door click shut, Len turned to me and said, "That guy gives me the creeps," I agreed. The storm didn't let up, and the power finally went out for good around 2:15. Generator kicked in, but half the lights stayed off. I brought the fire back to life, and Len made a pot of coffee using the camp stove in the back room. We didn't speak much, just sat near the hearth and listened to the wind howl through the chimney. Around 3:30, the hallway motion sensor blinked. Len checked the cameras. We only had 2 on that floor, one facing the elevator, one at the end of the hallway. Neither showed movement. Just static for a moment, then back to normal. When Len went to check room 2B about an hour later, the door was locked from the inside. He knocked, no answer. No signs of movement. In the morning, I called the room at 7:45. No reply. By 10:00, housekeeping was trying to get in for cleaning. Still locked. No answer. Eventually, Len used the master key. The bed hadn't been slept in. The heater was off. The room was colder than the hallway. On the nightstand sat the photograph, still folded, still faded. There were no wet footprints on the carpet, no used towels, no sign of a person having stayed there at all. But the bell on the front desk, it had a smudge on it, right in the center of the brass, like someone had pressed their thumb there and waited. I don't usually talk about this. Most people hear warehouse night shift and picture boredom and forklifts, not police reports or someone quietly losing their mind. But that year, 2019, something happened on my crew that I still can't quite explain. And I'm not the only one who saw it. I'd been working nights at the Lehigh Industrial Fulfillment Center in Allentown for going on 6 years when this happened. My title was overnight supervisor, but really it meant I made sure the pickers stayed on schedule. The conveyor didn't jam, and the younger guys didn't start screwing around after 200 a.m., which is when fatigue and bad ideas start to overlap. It was a good job, quiet, steady. I liked the routine. My crew was solid. Most of them had been with me for at least a year, which in that line of work says a lot. Late October that year, the district office sent us a new hire. Young guy named Wesley. Real name was something longer, but he went by Wes. 22, maybe 23. Slim build, buzzed haircut. Never took off this frayed green hoodie even on warmer nights. He was quiet but polite, said thank you when you handed him paperwork, nodded at everyone he passed. Didn't joke around, didn't slack off. Honestly, if you didn't look for him, you wouldn't notice him at all. And for the first couple weeks, he did fine. No issues. Then small things started happening. And they all started in the break room. That room wasn't much linoleum floor vending machines that barely worked, one long folding table with mismatched chairs. We had a microwave that always smelled faintly of burnt popcorn and a security camera in the upper corner, mostly to keep folks from sneaking off for naps during shift. One night around 300 a.m., I went to reheat my dinner and noticed the camera monitor positioned behind the front desk was showing something strange. Wesley was in the break room, sitting alone at the table. That part wasn't odd. What was odd was how still he was. He wasn't eating, not looking at his phone, just sitting there, hands flat on the table, staring forward like he was watching something I couldn't see. I remember thinking maybe he was just zoning out, so I walked back to check on him. The hallway to the break room only takes about 10 seconds to walk. But when I got there, the room was empty. Not just empty, silent. The kind of silence that makes you hesitate at the threshold. I checked the hallway, figured maybe I'd just missed him, but there was no sign of him anywhere nearby. I went back to the office, rewound the feed a little. There he was on the camera, sitting still as a stone for maybe 3 minutes. And then, without standing or turning, he just wasn't there anymore. The footage jumped. One frame, he was there. The next, he was gone. I told myself it had to be a glitch. The old feed did that sometimes skipped when the file corrupted or the motion detection misfired. Still, I made a note to ask him about it the next night, but he called out sick. No explanation, no warning, just didn't show. Same thing the night after. When he came back 3 days later, he looked different. Not visibly sick, just pale. Eyes a little sunken, like he hadn't slept well. I asked him if everything was okay, and he said, yeah, just stomach stuff. But he said it while barely making eye contact. And he didn't go near the break room for the rest of that shift. That pattern repeated for almost 2 weeks. He kept working, but he stopped using the break room entirely. 8 standing up near the loading dock spent his downtime, walking the perimeter of the floor like he was checking for something. I figured he was just going through something personal, and honestly, it wasn't my business unless it affected the work. But then another guy, Marcus, came to me during lunch and asked if I'd been messing with the camera feed. I said no, and he looked genuinely uneasy. said he'd been watching the monitor on his way past the front desk and saw someone standing in the break room doorway. Not walking, just standing in the corner behind the microwave facing the wall. The weird part, he said, was that the person was tall, way taller than anyone on shift, 6'5" at least. No one we had matched that height. I checked the footage. Same glitch, same missing seconds. That night I stayed until after the shift ended. Everyone else clocked out at 6. I stayed behind and reviewed all the break room footage from midnight to dawn. Hours of it, most of it normal. People coming and going, reheating food, laughing quietly. Then, around 3:13 a.m., there was a shape in the camera's upper corner. Too tall to be anyone we knew. And not just tall, thin. Shoulders that didn't slope right. The figure didn't move for almost 4 minutes. Then it turned not like a person turning, but more like a frame jump. It was suddenly facing the camera. I paused there. I wish I hadn't. The face, if it had one, was blurred. But not by the camera. The edges were wrong. Like someone had drawn a person's outline from memory and missed a few key details. I watched another 20 seconds. Then the monitor froze. Just locked up. The timestamp started blinking and the screen turned blue. That morning I called our regional IT guy, told him the feed kept glitching, asked if the camera might be overheating. He checked the logs remotely and said the hardware was fine. No heat issues, no packet loss. But he paused a long time before saying the last thing. There's a motion signature in that room every night at the exact same time. Even when no one's in there. I've flagged it before. I asked him why he hadn't told anyone. He said he assumed it was a sensor malfunction. Said that after reviewing it the first time he stopped checking. Some stuff you just let be, he added. I didn't like the sound of that. I told my shift to avoid the break room after midnight. Said it was under maintenance, even taped a sign on the door. Most of the crew didn't ask questions, but Wesley, he looked relieved. A week later, during our night audit, the alarm at the rear emergency door tripped. I ran back with Marcus to check it out, thinking maybe someone had stepped out for a smoke break and accidentally hit the bar. But the hallway was empty. The alarm had reset itself, which it never does. We chalked it up to a power flicker and went back to work. That same night, just before dawn, Wesley was gone. His badge was still at the desk. His punch-out time was never logged. We did a sweep. Nothing. No sign he'd ever left the building. I called Officer Brewster, the patrol guy assigned to our zone. He's a good man, ex-military. No nonsense. He searched with us for over an hour. Still nothing. Then Brewster asked if we had internal camera access. I hesitated, then showed him the feed. He watched about 10 minutes in silence. Then he leaned forward, stared at a single frame, and said, "You see that I didn't at first, but then I did." Wesley had been walking down the hallway back toward the front desk when he paused. He turned slightly, as if someone had spoken behind him. Then, just outside the frame, a long shape entered the edge of view. It wasn't a person. It was too tall. Again, that same disproportion. Wesley's body tensed, then he stepped forward and vanished from the frame. There was no exit door, no angle where he could have turned. He just wasn't there anymore. Brewster stayed another 20 minutes, didn't say much. Before he left, he gave me his card and told me, "If you ever see that again, call me directly." We never found Wesley. His belongings were boxed up after 30 days and sent to a P.O. box no one ever claimed. HR marked it as voluntary resignation. Case closed. The break room camera still glitches every few nights, always around the same time, 3:13. I stopped watching after a while, but sometimes walking past the monitor I catch it flickering, and once in a while, just for a second, I see something in the corner, tall, still, not quite shaped right, always just before the screen goes blue. The last real summer before everything changed was 2004. I was 16, old enough to stay home alone, not quite old enough to drive. Our neighborhood in the southern suburbs of Denver was the kind of place where people left garage doors open during the day and let sprinklers run too long. Families knew each other at least well enough to wave at the mailbox. There weren't a lot of secrets on our street, or at least we thought there weren't. My parents both worked full-time. My dad at an engineering firm, my mom at a physical therapy clinic. So during that last week of July, I had the house to myself most afternoons. I didn't do much with the freedom, played video games, ate too many peanut butter sandwiches, sprawled out on the carpet in front of the box fan like a cat in a sunbeam. The house always felt bigger when it was empty, quiet in a way that makes you notice the click of the fridge or the hum of the ceiling fan in the hallway. The first time I noticed the van, it was parked 2 houses down, idling with the windows cracked. Nothing unusual about it at first. A navy blue Dodge Ram van, older model, paint chipped near the bumper. It was the kind of vehicle you'd see parked outside a plumbing job or loaded with lawn equipment. But it didn't move, not for hours. I remember glancing at it through the blinds while I made a bowl of cereal. I thought maybe it belonged to the Connolly family. They were redoing their kitchen that summer. But by dusk, when the sun finally dropped behind the houses and the sprinklers kicked on, the van was still there. No one got in or out. No tools were unloaded. Just sitting there, engine off, like it was waiting. The next day, it came back. Parked across the street this time, closer to our house. Again, no movement. The driver's side window was rolled down a couple inches, and I could see part of a sun visor folded down, maybe blocking the view in. But the rest of it looked the same. No plates on the front bumper, which wasn't unusual in Colorado, but still made me notice. I told my mom about it when she got home, and she brushed it off, said it was probably someone on a job nearby or a neighbor's visitor. But when I asked around, no one on our end of the cul-de-sac recognized it. Mr. Chan next door said it had been sitting near his mailbox the day before, but hadn't seen anyone inside. By the 4th day, it felt deliberate. I'd catch myself glancing through the living room blinds without even realizing I was doing it. The van would always be in a different spot. Not directly across from our house, but always close. Always with that slight downward tilt toward the curb, like it had settled into place and meant to stay there. That Friday, I was walking back from the corner gas station with a soda when I passed by it. Just 10 feet away on the sidewalk, close enough to hear the faint tick of the engine cooling. I didn't look directly at it, but I saw something that stopped me cold. The passenger side mirror was tilted in, not folded for parking, angled deliberately like whoever was inside didn't want to be seen from the sidewalk. A detail like that doesn't mean much on its own, but it stuck with me. I tried to shake it. Didn't want to be the kid who spooked over nothing. But that night, just after 11 p.m., I woke up needing a glass of water. As I passed through the upstairs hallway, I caught a glimpse of the van from the window. It was parked under the streetlight this time, directly in front of our house. Headlights off, but I could make out the outline clear enough. And someone was in the driver's seat. I stood there at the window longer than I should have, holding my breath. The person didn't move, but they were sitting upright, visible in profile, when the wind stirred the leaves enough to shift the shadows. They were watching the house. The next morning I told my dad. He didn't say much at first, but I could tell from the way his mouth tightened that he took it more seriously than Mom had. He walked outside with his coffee, made a show of checking the lawn sprinklers. The van wasn't there that morning, but he called the non-emergency police line anyway, left a message with a few details. That Sunday afternoon, I was alone again. It was muggy, the air still the kind of day where everything feels weighed down. I'd been sitting on the back deck, flipping through an old magazine, when I heard a soft knock from the front door. 3 slow taps, then silence. We didn't get visitors on Sundays, especially not ones who knocked like that. I stood just inside the hallway, peeking through the peephole. No one was there, but the van was back. This time it was parked just 3 feet from the bottom of our driveway, closer than it had ever been. No one visible inside. I stared at it for a long time, expecting someone to step out or drive away. But it didn't move. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the phone, dialed the non-emergency line again, but before I could finish leaving a message, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The side door of the van, one of those sliding doors that opens along a track, was ajar, just enough to see that someone had been inside. A folded blanket, a plastic jug, something that looked like a notebook lying on the floorboard. I hung up and dialed 911. The officer who responded, Sergeant Williams, was calm, maybe a little tired, but took me seriously. He asked how long the van had been parked in the neighborhood and whether I'd seen anyone inside. I told him everything I could remember. He walked around the van, tapped on the frame with his flashlight, and finally slid the side door fully open. Empty. No tools, no ID, nothing but a pillow, a few empty bottles, and a crumpled paper bag that smelled faintly like fast food. He checked the glove box, found nothing. The rear plate had been partially covered with duct tape. Williams called in the plate anyway, waited a few minutes, then nodded and walked over to me. He said the van was registered out of state, Montana. Hadn't been reported stolen. No active warrants. But the name on the registration didn't come up in the system at all. Not in DMV records. Not in any databases. Could be a fake plate, he said. Or someone living off-grid. Before he left, he said something that's stuck with me. He said, "Sometimes people just pick a place and decide to sit still. Doesn't mean it's about you, but doesn't mean it's not." That night, the van didn't return, nor the next night. In fact, it didn't come back at all. But here's the thing that still unsettles me. About a week later, my dad was trimming the hedges along the side of the house, and he found a granola bar wrapper wedged under the shrubs. Not ours, not a brand we ever bought. Slightly torn, like someone had been crouched there waiting, watching through the side window of our living room. I still think about that, not just the van, but the knock, the positioning, the way it always moved just enough to stay nearby without drawing too much attention. Whoever was inside knew our routines, knew when I was alone, knew when to park and when to disappear. and I wonder if we weren't the only house they watched, or if maybe we were the only one that noticed. I don't usually go anywhere in the off-season, but that year I needed the quiet. It was early October 2022, just after the summer rush had drained out of the Carolina coast. The tourists were gone. The boardwalk shops shuttered and the beaches were bare except for the occasional shell hunter or bundled-up local walking a dog. I found the place on Airbnb, a little one-bedroom guest cottage behind an older woman's house, maybe 4 blocks from the shore. The listing had grainy photos and a few reviews that said it was peaceful and private, which was all I really wanted. The host, Miss Ruth, must have been in her late 70s. She wore a windbreaker even though it was 70 degrees and kept her white hair pinned back in the neatest little coil I've ever seen. She gave me the key from her front porch and pointed out a few things about the cottage, how the porch light switch was tricky, how the screen door had to be pulled shut hard or it wouldn't catch. She said, "If you need anything, I'll be inside. I don't hear great after 10 p.m., but just knock in the morning if something's off." The cottage itself was old but clean. You could tell it had been part of the main house at one time, probably a garage or servant quarters long ago. The walls were thin. The floors creaked in the corners. There was a little kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, a small table, and one of those oscillating fans that buzz louder than they cool. It was perfect. The first night I didn't sleep much, not because anything felt wrong, just the usual. Travel, stiffness, new place, unfamiliar mattress. I kept the windows cracked to hear the ocean, and I drifted in and out to the sound of wind through the palms and a faraway foghorn. But sometime around 3:30 a.m., I heard the door shift, not open, not slam, just a soft click like the latch moving in the frame. I sat up, listened hard, but there were no footsteps, no voices, nothing after that. I figured maybe the wind caught it. Maybe I hadn't shut it tight. I got up, checked the front door, and sure enough, it wasn't latched. It looked closed, but wasn't locked. I pulled it tighter and turned the deadbolt, then wedged a kitchen chair under the knob just in case. The second night it happened again. This time I know I'd locked the door. Double-checked it after brushing my teeth. But around 4 a.m., I heard the same thing soft creak followed by that metallic click. I held my breath, stayed perfectly still. Then I heard something else, not inside the room, but near the porch. It was the sound of breathing, long, steady, almost measured, just outside the thin wooden door. I didn't get up this time. I stayed frozen under the covers listening until the sound faded. The next morning I asked Miss Ruth if she'd seen anything. She just blinked at me and said no one had rented the upstairs unit since August. The cottage didn't have a camera. I checked the listing again, hoping I'd missed something, maybe a smart lock or motion detector. Nothing. So I went to the only place open at that hour in town, a gas station half a mile down the road, and bought a door wedge and one of those personal alarms shaped like a keychain. The man behind the counter was middle-aged, friendly, and a little too awake for 6 a.m. He looked at the door wedge and said, "You staying at Miss Ruth's?" I blinked. "Yeah, the guest house." He nodded slowly. "Thought so. That place gets renters this time of year. You hear anything weird?" I asked what he meant. He said, "Just that folks don't usually stay past the third night. Door don't like to stay locked is all." That night I wedged the door shut from the inside, turned the deadbolt, and even pushed the little table in front of it for good measure. I left the hallway light on. At 2:47 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. No call, just a vibration like an alert or motion notification. But I hadn't brought any smart devices with me. No cameras, no security app. When I looked at the screen, it just said, "Motion detected, front door." That made no sense. I sat up slowly, and that's when I saw the shape through the thin linen curtain on the front door window. A man's outline. Still. Not moving. Just standing there. I didn't get up. I barely breathed. The figure didn't knock, didn't speak, just waited. I stared at the curtain until my eyes watered. Then, after maybe 5 minutes, he moved. Not toward the door, but across the porch, toward the left side of the house, where the bedroom window was. I ran to the bathroom and locked myself inside. Didn't come out until daylight. When I finally opened the front door, nothing was there. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. The door wedge was untouched, but the deadbolt was unlocked. Miss Ruth wasn't on her porch that morning. I walked around to her side of the property and knocked, but no one answered. The house looked closed up, blinds drawn tight. I left later that day. I never wrote a review, never got a message from Ruth either. When I checked the listing again a month later, it was gone. But that wasn't the last time I saw that motion alert. A few weeks after I'd returned home, still sleeping with a wedge under my apartment door, I got another vibration on my phone. Same time. 2:47 a.m. No app listed, no camera name. Just one line on the lock screen, "Motion detected, front door." I don't use smart home devices, never have. But somehow the message kept coming once a week like clockwork, always at the same time. And I never figured out how to stop it. Back in high school, I had 2 close friends, Charlie and Denny. We were the kind of kids who didn't do much partying, but still found our ways into trouble. Quiet kids, mostly. Grew up in the same Kansas town, went to the same schools, same tired movie theater, same parking lots. One weekend in September, the 3 of us drove out to the state fairgrounds. It was that last weekend before the fair shut down for the year, when the crowds thin out and most of the tourists have packed it in. There's a weird emptiness to places like that, like something's still breathing through the rides and booths, even after everyone's gone home. We got there just after dark. Charlie was driving his dad's truck. Denny rode in the bed wrapped in a flannel, and I brought my dad's old Canon to mess around with. The fair had already started to fold. Half the food stands were closed, and most of the big rides were roped off. But there were still lights on, music playing faintly through the speakers, and the smell of old popcorn and hay everywhere. Charlie wanted to find the tilt-a-whirl, said it had been part of the fair since his mom was a kid. Denny mostly just wanted to flirt with girls. I was trying to get a few weird night photos, long exposures, shadows, stuff like that. Around 9, we found a tucked-away corner near the back of the fairgrounds, past the barns and show tents. There was an old photo booth set up there, the kind that printed 4 pictures in a strip. It looked too old to be in service, scuffed up, leaning slightly with half the light bulbs out on the top sign. But the screen inside was glowing blue. It worked. There was a girl sitting inside. She was leaning forward, staring into the screen like she was waiting for someone to hit the button. She couldn't have been older than we were. Maybe 17, maybe 18, wearing a long, dark hoodie and white tennis shoes that looked brand new against the dusty fairground gravel. Charlie gave me a look. Denny was already grinning. We hovered a few feet back, not wanting to interrupt, but the girl didn't move. She just kept staring into the screen. The little red countdown light started to blink. 3, 2, 1. The camera flashed, then again. 4 pictures. The machine buzzed, but nothing came out. She didn't seem surprised. She just stood, turned toward us slowly, and walked right past without saying anything. I caught a glimpse of her face in the flickering midway lights. Pale, calm. But her eyes looked almost too wide. Charlie nudged me and said, "She didn't get her pictures." We waited another minute, then Denny slipped inside the booth, said he wanted a souvenir. I went in next, then Charlie. We all took turns laughing and making dumb faces like we were 6 years old again. Each time the countdown blinked, the flash popped 4 times, and then nothing came out. We thought maybe the printer was out of paper or the ink had dried up. But then, just as we were about to walk away, a single strip came out of the slot. It only had 3 photos. First photo, Denny sitting in the booth, flashing a peace sign. Second, me mid-blink, caught in the flash. Third, Charlie with his mouth open like he was talking. But no 4th picture. And none of us remembered the machine ever skipping a flash. We joked about it on the drive back, saying the camera didn't like Charlie's face, or that maybe the 4th shot got lost in some digital void. We tossed the strip on the dashboard and forgot about it. The next night, Denny didn't show up for school. Neither did Charlie. I figured they'd skipped, maybe working on some prank or got caught up in something dumb. But when I called both their phones, I got nothing but static. Not voicemail, not even a ring, just a burst of white noise that cut off after a few seconds. I didn't sleep much that night. The following morning, I found the photo strip tucked under my windshield wiper. I hadn't brought it home, I was sure of that. But now there were 4 pictures. The first 3 were the same, but the fourth was of the girl, the one in the hoodie standing outside the booth. Only this time, her face wasn't blank. She was smiling wide and unnatural eyes fixed directly on the lens. I went to the county police, showed them the photo, explained what happened. Officer Delgado was the one who took the report. He kept looking at the 4th picture like he wanted to say something but didn't. All he asked was, "Did either of your friends mention her name?" I said no. He nodded once, slid the photo strip into a bag and said, "We've had a couple reports like this. Never the same booth, never the same girl. They never found Charlie or Denny. Their phones were never recovered. Their bank cards were never used. Their families posted flyers and held vigils and searched every square mile of the county, but there was never a single piece of evidence that they'd left that fairground." Sometimes I still think about that photo. The girl's face, that exact smile. I've seen it again. Not in real life, but on old flyers, abandoned fair posters, sometimes in the background of news stories or Craigslist ads for carnival jobs. Always the same expression, and always printed in sets of 3. I never liked staying at motels that left the front desk empty at night. Something about walking into that quiet lobby after midnight, hearing the ice machine humming through the wall, always made me feel watched. Not by anyone in particular, just watched. That trip through Sonora was the last time I ever booked a place, just because it was cheap and close to the job site. I was 33 then. I worked logistics for a freight company out of Reno, moving construction equipment across California. I wasn't supposed to be in Sonora that night, but a last-minute reroute left me stranded for a day, while the yard in Modesto sorted out a container mix-up. My company booked a room for me at a roadside motel just off Highway 108, the kind with faded red doors and thick beige curtains pulled shut all the time. Tony, the clerk on duty, was maybe in his 50s. Friendly guy, loose ponytail, silver stubble along his jaw. He had a habit of talking like you were already part of the conversation. When I checked in, he slid a paper key card across the counter and said, "Don't worry, the lady in 209 keeps to herself. Been here a while." I hadn't asked. The place was quiet, only about 6 cars in the lot. I was in room 104, bottom floor, far side. It was a basic setup. 2 beds, a table bolted to the wall, one of those silent mini-fridges that hums when the lights go out. I unpacked, ate a gas station sandwich, and spent most of the night catching up on scheduling logs on my laptop. Around 1:30 in the morning, I got up to brush my teeth, and when I stepped out of the bathroom, I saw something strange on the dresser. There was a second room key, not mine, and it was labeled 209, just sitting there beside my phone. At first, I thought maybe I'd picked it up at the front desk by mistake, but I remembered Tony only handing me 1 card. Still, I figured it was a mix-up, and since I was wide awake anyway, I brought it back up to the office. The lobby lights were off. I knocked, waited. Nothing. I knocked again, this time louder, and eventually I heard Tony unlock the back door and shuffle up to the counter in slippers and a denim jacket. When I handed him the key and told him I'd found it in my room, he paused and looked at me for a second too long. Then he smiled in that vague, too casual way people do when they're trying to sound unbothered. He said, she must have dropped it on her way in. That happens. I'll bring it back up to her later." I told him that didn't make much sense, that the key was inside my room, not outside, and I hadn't seen anyone walk by. He just nodded, took it from me, and went back through the office door. I didn't sleep well. Every time I started to doze off, I'd hear faint movement from the floor above me, soft steps crossing from one end of the room to the other. Sometimes they'd pause right over my bed, then return to the other side. It wasn't unusual to hear other guests at a motel, especially if the walls were thin, but something about the rhythm felt rehearsed, like she was pacing. The next morning, I asked Tony if the woman in 209 was all right. He shrugged and said, "She's a little off, but harmless. Pays cash, keeps to herself. I don't ask questions." I left around 10 a.m. to get breakfast and take a few calls in the parking lot. When I came back an hour later, the motel lot was empty, except for my truck, and room 209's door was wide open. The curtain was drawn, but the door itself hung open like someone had left in a hurry. I went to the lobby again and mentioned it to Tony. He didn't seem surprised, said she probably checked out early. He walked up with me to close it, but when he stepped inside the room, he stopped short. I only saw in for a second enough to register that the bed hadn't been slept in. There were no bags, no trash, no shampoo bottles in the shower. No signs of someone living there at all. The lights were off. The air felt cold even with the heat outside. Tony looked genuinely confused then. I asked how long she'd been staying. He said about a week, but now he wasn't sure if he'd actually seen her come or go. He said she always paid in the evening, left the cash in an envelope at the desk when he wasn't around. He thought she was trying to avoid contact. That afternoon, I saw a sheriff's cruiser pull into the lot while I was loading out. I didn't think much of it until Tony flagged me down and asked if I'd mind talking to the deputy. The officer's name was Harlan. Seemed steady, polite. He asked if I'd noticed anything odd the night before, any noise, visitors, anyone knocking. I mentioned the footsteps, the key card, the open door. I told him I never actually saw the woman in 209. That made him frown. He said the department had been looking into reports of a woman matching that room's name, someone who'd gone missing 2 years earlier. Her ID had been used to check in at 3 motels. Up and down that stretch of 108, always paying cash, always alone, never caught on surveillance. When I asked how they knew it was her, he said they weren't sure it was, just that her name kept showing up. But no clerk ever remembered her face. I left that motel before sunset. Something about the place felt wrong in the daylight, like the shadows were deeper than they should have been. A week later, I got a call from Officer Harlan. He told me room 209 was sealed off now. They'd found something odd in the wall behind the bathroom mirror, a stack of photos curled from age. Every single one showed the same woman, standing alone in a motel room. Same bag, same coat, same expression. But in the last photo, she wasn't alone. She was sitting on the end of the bed, and someone was standing behind her just out of focus. From the shape of the arm and the clothes, Harlan said it looked like a man, someone with a jacket like mine. But I never went upstairs. I never touched that room. I still don't know if the key was ever meant for me or if she left it there on purpose. All I know is I don't take ground floor rooms anymore. And I don't ask questions when something doesn't feel right, especially if it starts with a knock. I spent most of my life driving at night. There's a rhythm to it that some people hate, but I found comforting the stillness of empty streets, the faint glow of neon signs, and the knowledge that everyone else is asleep while you carry people from one forgotten corner to another. In 2019, I worked nights for a small cab company in Kansas City, and there's one ride from that time I've never been able to let go of. It was close to 3 in the morning when I pulled into the industrial district. The warehouses were dark, except for the occasional security light that flickered on a timer, and the streets looked washed out in that strange yellow haze. Dispatch had sent me for a pickup near an old textile building that had been abandoned for years. They didn't give me a name, just an address, and the note that a man had called in and asked for a ride heading west. When I pulled up, the place looked deserted. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the faint clatter of a loose piece of sheet metal against the wind. I was about to radio back that no one was there when I noticed a figure standing under one of the security lights. He was tall, maybe in his early 40s, dressed in a gray coat that hung loose like it was 2 sizes too big. He didn't wave me down, just started walking toward the car, as if he already knew which one was his. He opened the rear passenger door and slid in without a word. The smell of cold air and dust clung to him like he had been standing outside for hours. I asked where he needed to go, and after a pause long enough to make me wonder if he had heard me, he said, "West Side. Just drive." His voice was low and flat, without any urgency or impatience. I pulled out onto the road and started driving toward the highway. At first, I thought maybe he was homeless or had been staying in one of the vacant buildings, but he didn't look unkempt. His hair was trimmed, his face clean-shaven. though his skin was pale in a way that made me glance at him in the rear-view mirror more than once. He never looked back at me, only out the side window at the passing warehouses and shuttered shops. I tried making small talk, asking if he had family in town or if he was catching a bus farther west. Each question landed in silence. Finally, he leaned forward just slightly, and in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, he said, "You've been here before, haven't you?" The question sent a chill through me. I had in fact been through those streets countless times, but the way he asked made it feel like he knew more than that. I asked him what he meant, but he leaned back again and didn't answer. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the faint hiss of the heater and the occasional thump of the tires over uneven pavement. After 10 minutes, he told me to turn into a side street I knew led only to a row of boarded-up warehouses. I hesitated, saying there wasn't much down there, but he repeated it this time more firmly. Against my better judgment, I made the turn. The streetlights were patchy, leaving stretches of darkness broken by pools of dim light. Halfway down the block, he told me to stop. He didn't move right away. He just sat there, staring out the window at a warehouse with a broken chain-link fence. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing but weeds and a rusted loading dock. Finally, he opened the door, stepped out, and stood there, as if listening for something. I kept the engine running, waiting for him to close the door, or tell me he had changed his mind, but he never did. I leaned across the seat and asked if he was sure this was where he wanted to be dropped. He turned his head just enough for me to see his face, and though the shadows hid most of it, I could tell he was smiling. "You'll remember this," he said softly, and then he shut the door. He walked toward the warehouse, his figure slipping in and out of the dim light, until finally he disappeared into the shadows. I waited for several minutes watching the spot where he had gone, but he never came back out. When the cold began to creep in through the cracked door, I pulled away and headed for the nearest open gas station. Inside, I told the clerk about the strange ride. The man behind the counter frowned, said he'd grown up in the area, and that the building I described had been sealed up for over a decade. He asked me what the passenger had looked like, and when I gave a rough description, his face tightened. "You're not the first driver to say something like that," he muttered. When I radioed dispatch, they told me the ride hadn't been logged in the system. No call had come through, no address had been given, and they had no record of sending me there. Later that night, I saw patrol cars parked along that very street, their lights washing over the warehouse walls, but I never found out what they were looking for. All I know is that I can still picture him stepping into my cab, as real as any other passenger I ever carried. And when I drive past that part of town now, I find myself checking the mirrors, half expecting to see him sitting silently in the back seat again. That memory stays with me, the same way all these stories do not, because of what happened, but because of what I still don't understand. They linger like unfinished sentences, as if something more was meant to follow, but never did. Thinking back over all the places I've been, motels, diners, warehouses, and roads, I realize none of them were ever supposed to matter. They were the kinds of places people passed through without thinking, spots you only remembered when you had nowhere else to go. Yet it's in those places, the forgotten corners and quiet streets, where the unease always seems to gather. The details repeat themselves across different lives, The wrong name spoken by a stranger, the sound of footsteps where there should be none, or the faint glow of a light in a building no one uses anymore. What unsettles me most is that none of these things leave proof behind. They don't add up to anything you can hold on to, only impressions that cling to you in the dark. Maybe that's why the stories stay with us. They're not warnings we can explain, but reminders that sometimes the places we overlook are the ones still watching us. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of these stories. If you'd like to hear more nights like this, consider subscribing and sharing with someone who might listen in the dark too. And tell me, have you ever been somewhere ordinary that left you unsettled for reasons you still can't explain?